And then I can still see a big, almost empty apartment in Brussels, with only a woman in it, often in her robe, a woman who has just lost her husband. It's funny, but I don't picture this woman outside, although she does sometimes go out. She walks down the street, she waits for the tramway. I especially see her on the telephone and lying down on her sofa in front of her television, sometimes with a newspaper in front of her. When she's on the phone, she speaks too loud and with a liveliness that seems a little forced sometimes, but not always. Tonight, Friday, she won't be at home. No, she will be spending the evening with family. She likes that. She gets dressed, she puts on makeup, someone comes to pick her up and brings her home again. They love her in the family, I think. It's her close family. But the closest family she has is far away, very far away. So she stays in touch with them, but only by phone. It's not the same, of course, as being picked up in the car, being kissed, seeing a woman, her cousin, smiling at her and saying, "So, how are you?" And her children too, her cousin's children, and a man, her cousin's husband, talking kindly to her and with humor. He's so good-humored, this man, in fact, that she wonders sometimes if it's humor or not. But since she knows he's a good-humored man, she takes it for humor and she laughs with all her heart and kisses everyone, and it feels good in her bones. Sometimes someone even remembers something about her husband, often something amusing. Her husband was someone who was amusing in his own way. Yes, not always, but sometimes. When we speak about him, we feel like smiling, and even like laughing because in his own way, he was amusing. He had a round face and a mustache. That's not what was amusing about him, but the way he talked when things were going well. He would talk with that little air he had, and it was just amusing. Everyone agrees about that. All right, now she's decided. She'll go for a second operation. She will wait until her daughter, who lives in Ménilmontant, comes back from her travels. Her daughter from Ménilmontant travels a lot. Just today, in fact, she asked her if when she came back from this trip, she could make another trip and be there for the operation, as she did the year before. Her daughter agreed. It's the kind of thing she agrees to. She knows she can count on her daughter, except that she lives far away. And counting on someone who lives far away is not the same as counting on someone who lives nearby. Her other daughter lives far away too, and she could count on her as well. But she restrains herself. If she didn't restrain herself, she would ask for more, especially on the telephone. Her two daughters would do for her, but she restrains herself. They have their lives, everyone does. Especially when you are far away, and even when you are nearby. Except when you are nearby, you can feel it on the telephone. And when you say to each other, "See you soon," sometimes you do see each other soon. You can say, "See you soon" on the telephone to those who are far away, but you know you won't see each other soon. And sometimes those who are far away, you don't call them anymore, or almost never, even when it's close family. For example, she never called one of her cousins who live far away near the sea with her daughter. She already has enough to do calling her two daughters who live far away, and also sometimes her sister who is far away. Sometimes her husband's sisters who are also far away, but only if it's serious and necessary. Only her daughter from Ménilmontant calls a cousin who lives far away. She also goes to visit on her trips, and when she comes back she has news. It's also close family that lives far away. But thanks to her daughter from Ménilmontant, she knows what's going on with the cousins. And it's a kind of contact, and with what's going on there, she'd rather not think about it anyway. If she thinks about it, she starts thinking about everything that she doesn't let herself think about. She's very good at not letting herself think about what she doesn't want to think about. At least, she's trying to be good at it. She's trying, and it's so tiring. That's why she's always so tired. If she had to start thinking about everything she's thinking about, she'd be so full of thoughts that she wouldn't even be able to watch television or even make phone calls. She'd be so busy thinking. She absolutely wants to stay in touch, and the telephone is a good way to stay in touch, and therefore far away from all those thoughts that would keep her from talking on the telephone with any liveliness. But on the telephone, her daughter needs to talk about these two other women, the cousin who live by the sea, and that makes her think. Her daughter doesn't tell everything, but she guesses the rest. She's very good at guessing the rest, and she knows that her daughter wants to tell her, but not to tell her everything, so she won't think too much. So as she knows this, she knows there must be more, and she guesses the rest. And she's afraid for them, her family, these two women who are living together again, and it's terrible, a mother and a daughter. Sometimes on the phone her daughter says, "I have to go now, because I have to make something to eat." There again, she guesses the rest. But this rest, she enjoys guessing. She knows she will imagine what her daughter will make to eat. And that way at least, she knows her daughter's eating and not dying of hunger there, in Ménilmontant. She knows she will imagine that her daughter will make to eat, and that way, at least, she knows her daughter's eating and not dying of hunger there in Ménilmontant, and so that gives her an appetite too. Otherwise, she has so little appetite when there is no one but her and no one else to feed but herself. She has no appetite, but when her daughter says on the telephone, "I have to go now because I have to make something to eat," she makes herself some soup or a fried egg, and she eats that, a fried egg and a piece of herring. It warms her bones. Also, she eats well on Fridays because she goes to visit her close family where she hugs everyone. There she eats. She eats and she feels good. And sometimes they talk about her husband, who's dead now, and they remember that he made everyone laugh. And then she goes home and she goes to sleep without thinking too much. Her daughter in Ménilmontant doesn't have any children. In fact, she doesn't care. Not her daughter, but she, herself. Maybe her daughter doesn't care, or maybe she does. She can't really tell. Maybe because her daughter can't either. All the other women her age do care if one of their children doesn't have any children. On the contrary, it makes them think and gives them dark thoughts, but not her. Sometimes she wonders why. She tells herself, "I'm not like the others." She's not sure though, because the others are hard to get to know, and it's even hard to know herself, because she'll think she knows herself, and then suddenly she's thinking something, and says, "I surprise myself." Finally, she doesn't know herself, and knows other people even less. All she knows is that she's going to get another operation, and she'd rather not think about it right now, because it's 2 months away. She'd rather not think about it, but she thinks about it anyway. Her other daughter, the one who lives even further away, almost in South America, has already suggested coming over for the operation. But she hasn't said yes yet, because her other daughter has a husband and children, and that's official. And when things are official, you can't pretend they don't exist. And her husband and her children need her other daughter. She can't just leave them every other day, even if it's not every other day that her mother is getting an operation. It's the second time she is getting operated on, and she hopes it's the last time. Her daughter from Ménilmontant has no children, and she really doesn't care that she doesn't have any, nor her husband either, so she can come when she has the operation, And she knows that her daughter from Ménilmontant will come. She thinks a lot, this daughter, and the one who has children thinks a lot too. But it doesn't show as much, probably because she has the husband and the children around. It doesn't show because one also sees the husband and the children. She thinks a lot about the daughter who thinks too much. She thinks a lot about her because she thinks too much. It worries her, especially when her daughter starts talking too much and her words come straight out of those thoughts. She starts talking too much and too fast. That comes from thoughts that are racing so fast that it's not even a thought anymore. And afterwards, she doesn't feel well at all, and there is nothing to do for it, but wait for it to pass, and for her to think normally again. That is the way she usually thinks, because after a while, it does pass. She knows this daughter as well as one can know one of one's daughters. She's always told herself that this daughter took after her, but no, she tells herself that this daughter is more like her husband who died, and she thinks that maybe since he died, she reminds her of him more. She whistles silently, the way he did. She does that a lot when she's walking down the street with her hands crossed behind her back like her husband. She forgets to talk and she whistles silently like her husband, and the hands behind the back are like her husband too. She thinks a lot about her husband's hands, and she thinks about her daughter's hands. Her daughter thinks about the close family who live by the sea in a hot country. She has also been to this hot country to see her sister and her cousin, and she has even seen an old uncle there who is dead now, and she never would have thought that she would ever see him again, because the last time she saw him, she was only 8 years old, and it was before she came to Belgium, and he didn't come, he stayed in Poland. She likes the heat, but her husband, who had such a white skin, didn't like it as much as she, otherwise she would certainly have moved there with her husband and her 2 daughters. Her cousin who lives down there, and who she doesn't call anymore, can't stand the heat either, and yet he does live down there in that heat by the sea. She lives there with her daughter, and it's hard for her, being with a daughter who screams and makes scenes in cafes and in bakeries and in other places as well. It's hard for her cousin, and when she thinks about it, she'd rather not think about it. And when she sometimes speaks of it with her daughters or with another cousin from Belgium, the one who never married, and one can understand why, they wonder how that could happen, and no one understands it. And everyone sighs, and even if one understands something, one doesn't say so, and in the end, that's even worse. And they try to remember when it started, and each one remembers something different, but they all agree that it's terrible. And then they talk about doctors who can't do anything, and that the mother has tried everything, and it still hasn't done any good. And then they talk about her husband's sister, but that was different finally. They tried everything for her husband's sister too, and still, in the end, nothing helped. And one tells oneself that she never had the will to leave, while her cousin's daughter does, at least one hopes so, but that's what you tell yourself. And besides, they repeat it often, and so do believe it. But in any case, it is a tragedy. When you think about all of that, you think that's a tragedy, and that's it. But that's not it. That's not all that you think. Like day follows night, you also think of the old mother of the cousin who is in a home for old people. And that's terrible too anyway. The cousin's old mother is also close family, but she's so old that she hardly remembers them. Sometimes she goes to see her cousin's old mother. Besides, She's her aunt, the sister of her mother, who had 3 sisters. She doesn't like to go to see her aunt, because afterwards she thinks, and it's all she can do, to put herself to bed. But it's close family, and you don't just leave your close family without going to see them. And yet, she only goes when she really feels obligated to go. Her aunt is so old, no one in her family ever believed that this old aunt would live to be so old. All of her sisters are already dead, although one would have thought that they would have lived longer than she, because they all loved life so much, unlike her. One was never sure that she liked life all that much. She blamed life for a lot of things, and also people, and also her family. Her family knew she reproached them for things, and they expected her to, and she did, and everyone was used to it, and it didn't bother them anymore. She doesn't know much about her granddaughter who lives with her daughter by the sea. She doesn't know that it's not a life for the 2 of them down there, and if she did know, she couldn't do anything about it anyway. That's one thing she knows for sure, that you can't do much for other people, not even for your own daughter and granddaughter, and not even for yourself. It is in her character to know this. She has the kind of character that knows this, and so did her sisters. But still, they had a better sense of humor than she did, and they knew how to laugh about it all, and it felt good in your bones to laugh about it. She only has 1 daughter and 1 granddaughter, and both of them are far away. Maybe it's better that way, maybe it's not. It's hard to say about these things. I've always thought that my aunt overdid it with her reproachfulness, but no, sometimes I wonder if finally she wasn't right. But even if she was right, blaming doesn't do any good. In any case, it's something to talk about, otherwise, what's left to say? I always say to my daughter from Ménilmontant, as long as I can hear your voice on the telephone, I'm all right, and I can tell if you are all right. You always say you are all right when I ask you if you are all right, but you say it in a way that's so distracted that I know you are thinking about something else. And right after that, you always say, I have to go now. When you say, I have to make something to eat, then I am all right, and I even have an appetite myself. But when you don't say anything, but I have to go now, without adding anything, then I sit there and I think about you. Or rather, I don't think. I just sit there as if something was missing, and something is still missing. It doesn't have to be, I have to make something to eat. It could also be, I have to go out. I like that too. Even if it's only, I have to go walk the dog. But to say nothing, except I have to go, that leaves me hanging. So I sit there by the phone, and I feel a little cold. If, all of a sudden, the phone rings again, and it's my other daughter calling from so far away, never mind the money, then the call leaves me, and I answer with liveliness. My other daughter can tell right away that I was cold, and she asks me right away, what's the matter? And is something the matter? I answer her, and it's true now that I'm fine, and she are wrong, no doubt, because of the long distance. And also I was just yawning, and that's why she thought I didn't sound right. You yawn. Are you tired? No. I just felt like yawning. I love yawning. It does me so much good, almost as much as laughing. Then I ask, how are the children and the husband, and what are they doing, and are they going on the beach for the weekend? And if my daughter says, no, not this weekend, I say, that's true, you can't go every weekend. And so we talk like this, and the coldness of the missing phrase completely disappears. And she gives her husband the phone, and he says, hello, how are you, big hug. And the 2 children get on, and don't say much, but they say something. And I ask them questions about school, and everything's fine. and we say goodbye and big hug and kisses and see you soon on the telephone. See you soon. And I hang up and the cold is gone and I get dressed and put on my makeup and go catch a tram to visit a friend. I often take the tram, but sometimes they come pick me up in the car. I passed my driver's test 30 years ago, but I've never driven. It was enough that my husband drove. He drove very badly, but loved his car. Towards the end, when he was very sick and they told him, "You are getting better," he would ask one question, whether he'd be able to drive soon. His car was in the garage, and from time to time he would ask to go to see it, and he started up and gunned the engine. It was an Audi, not a Mercedes, but he loved it like it was a Mercedes. He drove badly, and I was always very nervous when we went anywhere together. He never had an accident, but he could have had plenty. What characterized his bad driving was his hesitating. He would whistle silently and look to the left, and then to the right, and then to the left again, in the middle of the intersection. And after a minute, I tell him, "You can go now. I can go now." So, after another little hesitation, he would go. I don't know how he managed when I wasn't in the car with him. He took his car to work every morning, and he arrived safely without anyone to tell him, "You can go now." Anyway, I never drove, but it was me who knew the way, me who said go left or go right or go straight or just go now. Left he'd say, "Are you sure?" Yes. So after hesitating, he'd go left, and yet he got to work every day without me. He knew the way to work. When he died, my daughter from Ménilmontant wanted his car. She didn't drive either. She never wanted much, but what she did want was a chauffeur. I think she met one on the train when she came to see her father, when he didn't have much longer. I think, but I'm not sure I remember right, that she took his car before he died. No, it must have been afterwards. I'm not sure. That time and all the events of that time are fuzzy. In any event, before or after he died, she took the car and turned it over to a chauffeur, and the chauffeur ran into a wall, and she didn't have a chauffeur or a car anymore. Anyway, I'd rather she took a taxi, which is what she does most of the time. My husband never could understand how a girl from Ménilmontant without a husband or children would know how to drive. A girl who did as she pleased. The other one with the husband and the children knows how to drive and even has her own car. It's a good thing, because the distance in the country she lives in are enormous, and you have to drive everywhere, and she couldn't very well stay glued to her husband all the time. Not only that, but she already knew how to drive before she had any children or her husband, and before she lived far away, when she was still at home, when she was still here. She knew what she wanted, and she was a good driver, much better than her father, my husband, and maybe she took after me, who doesn't drive, but who could have, and who could have done a lot of other things that I never did. And sometimes I ask myself why, but that's how it is. And no, I don't do anything, and even less than when my husband was alive. When he was alive, he was there, and I was there with him. We were called Monsieur et Madame Untel. Now, everyone knows that he's not there anymore, and his car either. It's in the pond or somewhere. My daughter from Ménilmontant said there wasn't any car anymore, and it was better not to talk about the car. And I didn't talk about it like she asked, this car that he always asked about and whether he could still drive it. Anyway, I didn't want to think about it. My daughter from Montant said he'll never get better. There is only one thing to hope for, and that's the thing that happened. And even if you were expecting it, you didn't expect it, neither me nor my daughters. And they came from far away, my daughter with her husband and her children, and my other daughter too, with some of the family who also lived far away, but near her. Almost everyone in the close family came. My husband's two sisters with their husbands and their children, everyone was there except for those who lived by the sea. And we all hugged and kissed, but it didn't make your bones feel good. Not like it should have. Someone, a friend, said he left on tiptoe, the way he lived his life. And my daughter from Montant said, "Who is he talking about? What tiptoeing?" And then she stopped herself. But I'm sure she had a lot more to say in her head. This friend always told her, "I've known your father since before you were born." But this was not knowing him. My father wasn't easy to know. It took me years to know him a little bit. And it wasn't on tiptoe. Without being my daughter from Montant, I feel like saying the same thing about him, without judging him, and not just in my head. But if I start, it'll never end. So I'd rather not start, and especially not with my daughter from Montant, because then I would know what she thinks, and she would know it too. But even without that, she knows, and I also know, but not everything. She doesn't know everything that I think, any more that I know everything she thinks about. But what I do know is enough. And I didn't know everything that my husband was thinking either. But sometimes I would ask him, especially when he sat in his armchair with his head in his hand. He did that when I wasn't in the living room, especially when I was in the kitchen or in the bedroom, sometimes even in the toilet, well, anyway, when I wasn't there. But sometimes I'd come into the living room for one reason or another, or sometimes for no reason, and I would see his head in his hand, his face in his hand, all bent over, like he was thinking. So I would ask him, "What are you thinking about?" I would surprise him with the question. He must not have heard me come in, otherwise he wouldn't have been so surprised. Surprised yet, still in his thoughts a little bit, he would lift his head and drop his hand and look at me and try with all his might to tell me what he was thinking about. He would repeat my question, which has surprised him, but maybe not that much, and he would say, "I honestly don't know." It's funny now, when my daughter from Montant comes, when she comes to see me for an operation or something else, just to see me, I surprise her too with her head in her hand, like him. She didn't used to do that, or else I simply never noticed. But I don't ask her, "What are you thinking about?" I leave her alone. Besides, when I walk into the room, she feels it right away, and right away she lifts her head from her hand. When I'm feeling better, I go see her in Montant, but not right now. Right now, I need to be here, in my apartment, across from the tram stop, on the first floor near the telephone, smoking in the bathrooms. It's a habit I picked up when he was still alive, because from time to time he'd say, "Don't smoke so much." And my daughter from Montant, when she would come and he was still here, she'd say, "Do you think he doesn't know that you smoke? The bathroom smells more like cigarettes than if you smoked all over the apartment. I don't understand why you don't suffocate in that bathroom of yours." She smokes too, and he would tell her not to smoke so much, just as a matter of form, because smoking didn't really bother him. And his daughter would say, "I don't smoke that much," and it would stop right there. Still, sometimes he would say, "You've already smoked a whole pack." And she would say, "No, I haven't." And it would stop there. Now, when I talk to my daughter from Ménilmontant on the telephone, I say, "I can tell that you have been smoking a lot. I can hear it in your voice. It's bad for you. It tires you out." To me, she says it's true. I do smoke too much. She knows she smokes too much. And to me, she clearly says that she smokes too much. And I smoke too much too. And I tell her that. And we both tell each other that we'll try to smoke less. But to him, she always said she didn't smoke too much. And me, I smoke in the bathrooms. And now I still smoke in the bathrooms, but I smoke other places too. I know it's not good for me. It tires me out. But everything tires me out. I'm just someone who is tired all the time, except sometimes when I forget myself. It's pretty rare that I do that, forget myself. It has to be an occasion like a party, a big party with the whole family together, like a wedding, a party where there is dancing. Then I forget myself and I dance. Now that he's not here, I don't dance anymore. Besides, I don't think I've been to a wedding since he's been gone. But if I did go, I don't think that I would dance. Yet, at weddings, I was not only dancing with him all the time, I was also dancing with others. I danced all night, and I wasn't tired. I danced with others, and I danced with him. Weddings were often in the winter time, and when it was over, we took our coats from the coat room, and I wouldn't even put mine on. I was so hot and sweaty. I even had bits of sweat on my upper lips. He didn't like it, and he'd say, "Wipe yourself off," but very nicely, so I wouldn't take it badly, and we'd go out. I wouldn't put on my coat, just throw it over my bare shoulders. It was a fur coat. First, it was long, and then I had it shortened. And he liked me to wear this fur coat, which would have cost a lot of money, and it took years before I had one. And then, finally, I didn't have to wait anymore, and we went together to order it, and the furrier gave us a good price because we know each other a long time, and there, after the wedding, I simply slid it over my bare shoulders. They were bare because I wore a strapless dress, the same dress I worn to the wedding before, but it was only the second time I'd worn it, so I didn't think it was worth it to buy another dress, even if everyone had already seen me in that dress, because it was usually the same people at every wedding. And I waited there while he went to get the car, there, in the cold. The cold felt good and dry, and I felt so good, not tired or anything, while other couples leaving the wedding like us were yawning and gasping, saying they were tired. Not me. I felt absolutely fantastic. My daughter is like me, the one from Ménilmontant, and the other one, they both love to dance. The other daughter, no one is surprised that she likes to dance. That's her style. But my daughter from Ménilmontant, no one thinks she dresses very well, and yet she's choosy about her clothes. But they are not the kind of clothes that people who go to Jewish weddings like. I think they must be clothes that people she knows there in the city where she lives like. In any case, she doesn't dress up, and she almost never wears any makeup like those who go to weddings like too, except when she goes to weddings because she knows it makes her father happy, and she doesn't want to make him ashamed. Besides, she also dances with him, and when she dances with him, she smiles at him and tells him things, and he looks happy, and not at all thoughtful with his little mustache. Usually, it's her that asks him, and sometimes it's him, but not as often. And when they part, when they go to sit back down at the round table with the close family, at least those who were able to come, they look pleased with themselves. These are the things I think about when I have good thoughts. But when we talk about things like this, and it's not often, because it's not often that my two daughters are both with me at the same time, it's a good talk, because right away, after a moment of silence, while we look around at each other and smile, or even cry sometimes, we hug each other and we feel together, and we feel like close family. And there is nothing closer than family. And so, I feel the need to say, it's so rare we are all three together like this, and it's so good for us. I can't help saying it, even though I know that my daughters wish I wouldn't. I can tell they rather I didn't say it, because even though they say yes, it is, or you are right, I notice that they look a little distracted. But sometimes, when the three of us are together, we don't talk about that. Sometimes we don't talk at all. We just each think, and not always about that. Time like this, we say, it's really too bad about the car, because with one of us being able to drive, we could go someplace else, and that would be a distraction. So my daughter, who can drive, says, maybe we can take a cab and go somewhere. Then we all start thinking about the car that's no longer there, and about the accident, and how he loved his car. But the phone rings, and it's the husband, and the two children, and we turn the sound down on the television because we can't hear anything, and we are already feeling better. And we ask about their news, and the husband asks, and what are you doing today? And is the weather nice? So we'll talk about the bad weather, except today it's nice. So the husband says, don't stay in the house, go out and catch a cab, go someplace, and that way the time will pass and we end up going out, and in the taxi everyone is in a good mood. We talk about the dog that was left behind in Ménilmontant, and we laugh about the dog's name, which in our language means filthy, and that he deserves his name. And what a funny idea to give a dog like that a name like that. Finally, we get out of the cab. We walk in town and visit Claude's family, the ones I go eat with on Friday nights. And we hug and are happy, and decide to go to a restaurant to try and wake up my appetite. And we don't care about the money. We go to a good Italian restaurant or El Chinese, and we feel good sitting down at the table. And I have a little appetite, and my daughters watch me eat and tell me that I must eat, and that I have lost too much weight, and that I'm just skin and bones, and it doesn't suit me. And when we finish the main course, and I've had a nice tender steak pizzaiola, otherwise with my teeth I wouldn't be able to eat steak at all, and a steak because it gives me strength and it does me good, one of my daughters says, have some dessert. But they both know that I don't like sweets, and I don't really like them. I especially like spicy things, and everyone says he loved desserts so much, and he ate them even though we told him he couldn't because of his diabetes, and he'd say, just for once, with a smile, because he knew it wouldn't be just once. The sweeter it was, the more he liked it, and he was right in the end, because it wasn't that killed him, but something else. And he loved sweets so much, it was unbelievable. Sunday, we would often invite people over, so he would go to the pastry shop with the car and bring back cakes, delicious cake he would say, and everyone would have to take a piece, and him too, he would take one. We didn't dare say anything, but he knew what we were thinking. But in any case, it made him happy, like having grandchildren made him happy. It worried him. He did care that his daughter from Ménilmontant has neither husband nor children. That's how he was. It worried him. He wouldn't say anything to her about it, but it did worry him tremendously, and he didn't understand. He thought there must be something wrong, and he put his head in his hand about it. Of course, he knew she was the kind of girl who did whatever she wanted, so why couldn't she just as easily want to get married? But she wouldn't marry, so she must not have wanted to. He never said anything to her, but he was sure that she knew he was worried by it. Sometimes he managed not to worry about it, and he would see his daughter just as she was, and love her just as she was. But he was worried. His daughter didn't say much, and he didn't say much either. But they didn't need to. His wife said a lot, not what needed to be said necessarily, but she just said it. She loved everyone, and she always needed to say that she loved. He recognized this need in her, so he never said, "You've told me already," but he'd said yes, and then he would become a bit vague. She was never vague, really. On the contrary, when she said many times about the same people that she loved them so much, she'd end up adding that they also loved her. Then she would pass on to other things. Or she would sit on the couch to watch TV, or she would propose a cup of coffee. It was one or the other, or most often one after the other. When finally he did get grandchildren, he was very happy. They were the children of his daughter, who was married and knew how to drive. She and her husband also had an incredible number of shoes, and that bothered him. He couldn't understand why one would buy so many pairs of shoes. He thought it was wasteful. The number of his daughter's husband's shirts also bothered him. He also had a certain number of shirts, but a reasonable number. Like his son-in-law, his daughter's husband, he changed clothes every day. He liked that, the feeling of a clean shirt on his body every day. Sometimes he changed his suit, sometimes not. He would often buy himself 2 suits at a time when they were on sale, and 2 pairs of shoes at a time, but then he wouldn't buy anything for a long time. When his daughter from Ménilmontant would come, he looked to see how she was dressed, and if her hair was combed. But if he thought her hair was too wild, he tried not to show it, because that would have come between them, and that he couldn't stand it anymore. But he also couldn't stand if her hair was messy. So, if she was going out, he used that as an excuse to say, "Comb your hair before you go out." She'd do it because she couldn't stand to have a problem with hair come between them either. So, with her hair combed, she'd sit on his lap. That was the last years. Before the last years, she never would have combed her hair for him, nor sat on his lap, because she didn't feel that close to him anyway, and she couldn't imagine that she ever would, and she never imagined that what happened would happen. She certainly never imagined it happening, because he was the only one in the family who never got sick and was always in excellent health. Everyone else in the family was always down with something, a cold or flu or something. Never him, and certainly not the flu. He just had a little sugar in his blood, and that was a family thing from his mother's side. But one day he went to a doctor who didn't find any sugar in his blood, but then another doctor did later by chance. So for whole months he was able to eat desserts without anyone getting upset. Aside from that, he was always in excellent health, except that every night he fell asleep in his chair in front of the television, which either meant that the programs put him to sleep or else he was tired. But afterwards he would wake up and it was like he had seen the show or the movie. But anyway, even if he was more and more forgetful and his memory was going and that made him nervous, he'd still suddenly remember that he'd already seen the movie on TV or some other movie. But anyway, he'd already seen it. I'd already seen it too, but I didn't mind seeing it a second time while he slept. He slept in that armchair and all was well even after he got sick. Because when he was asleep, it was like before he got sick, except that before he got sick, he fell asleep because he was tired from working all day. But when he was sick, he hadn't been working all day. On the contrary. Still, he got up and put on a suit and a clean shirt and shaved. Sometimes he needed help. He didn't mind being helped. He didn't like to make a scene. But he would have preferred dressing himself and combing his own hair. I didn't like dressing him, but I did like combing his hair, because I used to do it before he was sick also. Sometimes I just smooth it with my hand, but usually I use a comb very gently. During this time, he hardly made anyone laugh anymore, and the family would come, and sometimes some of the close family could make him smile, and his daughter from Montaut would sit on his lap and stroke his face and tell him to pick up his right leg when he walked, and he would. And everyone was happy and said he was getting better. And without even being asked, the cousin who picks me up in the car on Friday nights would say, "Soon you'll be able to drive your car." And he said, "Yes, soon," a little like a question, with a little doubt, but only a little. You could see that he believed it a little. You could see it in his eyes. That didn't last though. After a while, everyone would leave because everyone lived somewhere else and everyone had their own life. Most of them lived in the neighborhoods outside of Brussels, where a lot of people like them live now. A lot of people who came to Brussels and who had lived in not so great neighborhoods are gone now, like the sister of my old aunt who are no longer here. My old aunt is still there though, living in a home for old people. She does not live in a nice neighborhood, and the others, when they were still alive, they didn't live in a nice neighborhood because it was too late for them to move. In this nice new neighborhood, people live in nice buildings with garages and basements on 3 streets and elevators. Some don't have elevators because they live in a villa like the family who come to get me on Friday nights. It's only since my husband is gone that they come for me on Fridays. Before, they didn't come because I was not alone, and if I did go, I went with my husband, and then he would drive. Now they come to get me, and they say that the children want to see me, and they love me, and I love them too, and I hug them, and it feels good in my bones. They are very nice, and I love them, and they love me, and so I have an appetite. They are my family. And my cousin looks at me, and I can tell she won't be happy if I don't eat and if I don't look put together. And because of her, I changed my glasses. She thought they were ugly, and she told me so. And now she's happy, and so am I too, to have new glasses. But if it would have been just for me, I wouldn't have changed my glasses. And my 2 daughters also noticed when they came from far away that I had changed my glasses, and they complimented me. And when we looked at the old photos that are in the shoebox, then they too complimented me, and how beautiful I was when I was young, and that I'm still beautiful, but I have to eat and stand up straight, because I have nice shoulders, and they don't like me to be all bent over and hunched up. He always wanted me to look good too, but he never said stand up straight. No doubt, since I saw him every day, and he saw me every day, and in the end, when he didn't go to work anymore, he saw me all day long, but not at night, because thank God, at night he would sleep. He didn't notice the changes in me, that I no longer stood up straight, and was getting more and more bent over. Although sometimes he would say, after looking at me for a long time, and I asked him, "Why are you looking at me for so long?" He would say, "You don't look very well." And then I'd have to find an excuse and put on more makeup so he would notice how bad I looked because he had enough to worry about. He slept at night, but he would wake up very early at 4 in the morning. I could tell right away, and I would wake up too and say, "What's wrong?" And I could see tears in his eyes, and he'd say nothing. And I would say, "I see that there is something." And he would struggle to get something out, and although it was harder and harder to understand what he was saying, I could tell it was something like, "I'm going to die." But he never said it in French, but in our language, so I would feel shocked, and I'd tell him, don't say that, and I'd say, "It's not true," and he looked at me with disbelief in his eyes. And I go get a sedative, and put it under his tongue like my daughter from Ménilmontant told me to do, so it would take effect quicker. And sometimes he'd go back to sleep, sometimes not, but at least he would have less tears and wouldn't say that thing about dying. But then I couldn't get back to sleep, and in the morning I looked terrible again. My daughter, who lives even further than the other one, had already told me the last time she came not to wear purple anymore, because it made me look washed out, so I didn't wear purple anymore. And then, after I had put on my makeup and some rouge, I'd go and ask him, "Do you still think I look terrible?" And he looked at me for a long time while I stood there and waited until finally he'd struggle to say no. And it was a terrible effort for him to speak with his mouth hanging down on the right side. Fortunately, the phone would ring, and at that hour it wouldn't be the daughter who has children, but the one who doesn't. And when I pick up the phone, I would find that it was indeed her. And of course, she would ask, "How is it going?" And I would answer, "All right." And she'd say, "I can tell by your voice that it's not." And I said, "What can I tell you?" And she said, "I don't know." And we talked like that about everything and about nothing. And finally, she'd ask to speak to her father. And I give him the cordless phone and say, "It's your daughter." And he'd take the phone with his left hand. It was easier with the left, but I stay and listen to what they say to each other. And he could barely say hello. And she asked him, "How are you, Dad?" And he put himself together to say, "Fine." And she say, "You're talking better today," sounding lively, almost like me when I answer the phone. And then she tells him 2 or 3 things about herself and how her work is going better and that she's making some money this time. And she gives him figures in dollars. And finally, she tells him that she's coming to see him the next day, she doesn't know what time, or that she'll call him at the same time tomorrow. And they hang up. And I start making something to eat, hoping that he eat and not leave everything, because I couldn't stand it when he left everything untouched on his plate. He'd push all the food into a corner of the plate and end up eating nothing. That I couldn't stand. I'd say, "How are you going to get better if you don't eat? You need strength," so he'd try to eat a little, but he couldn't. And neither could I, so I ended up throwing it all away. It wasn't worth keeping. Then he'd get up, I'd have to help him a little, and he walked to his armchair, dragging his right leg. Sometimes he'd stop on the way there and look at himself in the mirror, look at his mouth and his lips that hung on one side, and he'd shake his head. I liked afternoons better than mornings because then we'd get visitors and I'd make coffee and serve cakes and everyone talk, but it went too fast for him and he said nothing. But sometimes someone would ask him a question and close family would dare to say, "No, answer me. You have to practice talking." And sometimes he would try and then someone would say, "You see, you can when you want to." And once in a while he would laugh and repeat slowly, "When I want to, I can." And someone would say, "Well, that's how it is. And when is your daughter coming?" And I would answer, "Soon, maybe tomorrow." And someone would say to him, "You have to practice before she comes. You don't want to sit there saying nothing when your daughter is here." And he'd say no. And the afternoon would end and he'd be tired of all the noise because he participated very little in the conversation. And after a while, he couldn't follow it at all. When there were only 2 visitors, it was better, especially men from the close family, like the husband of one of his sisters, for instance. With him, he'd manage to laugh, and when he laughed, I'd relax. And I even stand up straighter and be less bent over like my daughter from Ménilmontant would tell me all the time. He always lived surrounded by women, but women in the family could rarely get a laugh out of him anymore. There were fewer men than women in the family, but it was mostly the men in the family who could get him to laugh. That's why he was so very happy when his daughter, who lived so far away, finally had a boy. He felt like it wasn't the same with a grandson as with a granddaughter, but he was careful because it made his granddaughter suffer, and she'd hunch up her shoulders. She was a pretty little girl, and he thought she resembled his daughter, but he thought his grandson looked even more like his daughter because he had a round face like his daughter and himself. His other daughter didn't have a round face, but she still looked like him because of the eyes and the hands. At least that's what the close family said, because they were always looking for likenesses everywhere, even between dogs and their masters. And he would ask himself, as far as dogs and their master were concerned, was it the dogs who end up looking like their master or mistresses, or vice versa? Either way, it was true. And he wondered if his daughter from Ménilmontant would end up looking like her dog and vice versa. Anyway, when she came, she often brought the dog, and the dog, who was a male, could also make him laugh. He didn't have to talk to the dog, just looking at him and petting him was enough. He would try to talk to his daughter, and she would always tell him, "Pick up your right leg when you walk, because you have to create a new memory circuit," or something like that. It's true, he'd lost a lot of his memory about a lot of things, and it bothered him terribly. And that was even before he got sick, no doubt an early sign. It nearly drove him crazy not to be able to remember words, never mind people's names, which was even more upsetting. When he couldn't find a word, a simple word, that he had said thousands of times, and he had to call me to help him find it, and that took forever because often I really didn't know what he was talking about, and he would try so hard. And when I finally got the word, he would be relieved and horrified at the same time that it was such a simple word. They had told him to read newspaper to stay in touch with words, and he tried to do it, though it tired him out. When he did read, he remembered all the words. It was only when he spoke that he couldn't remember them. When he had the words in front of him, he recognized them. His daughter from Ménilmontant said that it happened to her sometimes to forget a word, and that he shouldn't get upset about it. But he did get upset, because he liked to participate in conversation. He wasn't extremely talkative, but he liked to talk from time to time and tell about how he'd met some people on the train and what they talk about. His friends would say to him, "You're always meeting someone new on the train. That never happens to me." He knew that it entertained people when he talked about what happened to him on the train, and besides, It was fun, and everyone enjoyed it. It wasn't only his daughter who said that she sometimes forgot a word or a name. Everyone in his close family told him this. But he believed his daughter because she was a girl who always did exactly as she pleased and never felt obliged to say or do anything. Therefore, he believed what she said. He believed his other daughter too. Besides, she'd finally had a boy, and he had gone a long distance to the country where she was living to be at the circumcision. And he almost fainted, but he quickly recovered. And when he came home to Brussels, he told everyone how he had nearly fainted at the circumcision, and that impressed everyone, because they all saw him as a very strong man who was never sick and who had already survived so many things, notably his sister's suicide and the fact that one of his daughters had no children and wasn't married. And he had managed to deal with all that and work hard. Besides all of that, he had managed to survive without ever complaining. He was a man who never complained, although a lot had happened in his life that he could have complained about, yet he never did. When he got sick the first time, we got him to the hospital very quickly, and his daughter from Ménilmontant wasn't even in Ménilmontant, but working in Eastern Europe, where he had never returned since he had left as a child. But she came right away, and the day she arrived at the hospital, he came out of his coma, and she put a finger in his right hand and said to him, "Squeeze my finger." And he did it, and she said, "I'm completely reassured now. Everything is going to be all right." And he smiled a little with his mouth askew, and it wasn't worth complaining about. And his daughter left to go back to work, and his other daughter came and she told him the same thing. And every day we went to see him in the hospital. And I, his wife, didn't complain either, even though with me it was pretty much a habit. I could see the progress he was making, and I kept faith. But those 3 nights, when I was alone and he was in the coma at the hospital, I didn't want to call my daughters. No, I restrained myself. And I didn't complain either, but I felt like howling like a wolf. I felt myself becoming a wolf in my bedroom that was completely black at night. So finally, I ended up calling my daughters, and both of them were shocked, and they came and took care of everything. Even if there wasn't a lot to do, there are always things you have to do, like reassuring one another. Besides, it was reassuring that he was able to squeeze my daughter's finger from Ménilmontant. And every day we tried the experiment again. His mouth still drooped, but his hand squeezed. The whole close family came, and also close friends who almost all now live in our neighborhood. At this time, his car was still in the garage. His daughter from Ménilmontant hadn't taken it yet, while his daughter who could drive and who had come from far away and who still had jet lag took it out, and we went to the hospital in the car. That way we didn't have to take a cab, because before my daughter who knows how to drive came, that's what we did, and so we felt even more like we were going to the hospital, because we had to give the address to the cab driver, and we didn't even have to give him the address. We just said the name of the hospital, and everyone knew where it was. And often the cab driver would screech off like it was an emergency, and this time, between the house and the hospital became an ordeal. I don't know why. So I concentrated on the meter and the road, and every day the price was different. We would stay at the hospital for hours, and it tired him. Sometimes he gestured with his hand for us to go home, because he still couldn't talk very well. But we had hope, and we had a reason to hope, because his mouth didn't droop as much as in the beginning. And when he started talking again, I thought I'd have a heart attack. I was so happy, and I screamed, "See, you can talk." And he smiled a little. He started to talk again. He talked a little slower than usual, but he said things. That he didn't like the hospital food, so we brought him food from home, salmon and good bread, not dry bread like at the hospital, and sometimes he ate. You couldn't say he ate a lot, but something anyway. We told him he had to eat, and he'd say, "What for?" That was his kind of humor. But it was a kind of humor that irritated me under the circumstances. And in other circumstances too. Even at home, he was difficult about food. And every day I tried to make something he liked, but it was rare that he really liked it. And when I asked him if it was good, and I asked him that at every meal, he'd say, "Not bad." But he never said that it was good. And yet every day I asked him what he felt like eating, and every day he would answer, "Whatever you want." And that also was a kind of humor which in all circumstances irritated me, because I found myself having to decide alone what to make to eat, and I was never sure he would like it. And sometimes I wondered if I was such a bad cook. I knew I wasn't a great cook, but I always made simple dishes, and we always had vegetable soup to start to warm up, and because it was a habit, but whatever I made, I felt he ate it reluctantly, and I really took it to heart, too much to heart, my daughter said, because they always complimented me on my cooking, and they ate everything on the plate, and that made me happy, except they came so rarely, and when they came, they laughed when my husband said, "Not bad." They understood his sense of humor, and they tried to convince me not to ask whether it was good. That way, I wouldn't have to hear the same answer all the time. And then one day, my husband might say it was good spontaneously. But I was on pins and needles. I couldn't help asking him, even if I knew my daughters were right. Afterwards, it got even worse, because he could hardly hold a fork and a knife, so I had to cut his meat for him, and he had a horror of that. He didn't say anything, but he had this look of horror in his eyes, and I quickly gave him a sedative under his tongue so he wouldn't feel how badly it depressed him. And with his mouth askew, he could hardly eat, and sometimes I did manage to stop myself from asking him if it was good. I just asked him if he wasn't hungry, and he'd say no, by shaking his head. I wasn't hungry either. Everyone lost their appetite at home, even my daughters when they came. And everyone looked washed out, and all the friends started interfering and saying, "You can't let yourself go," and that it didn't do any good, and I had to take in all my skirts. They'll all become too big for me. I really didn't feel like buying new skirts that would fit me. And he got thinner too, but as he was always cold, he always wore a sweater under his suit vest, so you couldn't see how his suit had become too big, and he tightened his belt more. But his cheeks were a little less round, and his skin a little less fresh. He, who had always had such a good color, and therefore such a healthy look with his crown of white wispy hair and his nice colors, he was always a pleasure to look at. And when I kissed him every other minute and hugged him, I would breathe in the freshness of his cheeks. He always smelled so good, and he was always so rosy and fresh, and I told him he was handsome. All of his sisters had lovely fair skin also, and had light-colored eyes, even the one who committed suicide and who didn't think she was that pretty. And all his sisters adored him because he was their brother, their big brother, and they only had one, and he was always like a father to them, and he was always there when they needed him, because all of his sisters had at one time or another sister and girl problems. One of them left for America with her husband, and sometimes She missed her brother so much there that she would come back for months at a time to get her sanity back and stay at her brother's, and she brought her children with her, and we squeezed in and stayed together for months, and I liked that. I loved my husband's sister like they were my own sister, and I like it when we squeezed in, and we had no money, but we managed. He hated not having money. He struggled to have more, and I struggled with him, and then someone had to stay home to take care of my oldest daughter, because at the time the other wasn't born. A young girl came from the country. Later, I found out that the young girl had locked my daughter in the closet when she went to town, and also she ate raw steak with her hands, but it wasn't too serious. Later, I also found out that she took her to church. I found all this out because my daughter began to have a lot of nightmares, and finally she told me everything. Before the young girl came, she had a lot of nightmares too, but she didn't want to tell me those, and I didn't want to force her. She had nightmares and wouldn't eat, and that was a nightmare for me. Fortunately, my second daughter wasn't such a difficult eater. Fortunately, because I don't know what I would have done otherwise. My daughters were not alike, fortunately. They were even quite different. We live in a bad neighborhood of Brussels, but we always had a bathroom, and that was great. He was ready to scream on everything, but not on a bathroom. And every time I went into this bathroom, I felt like I was living in luxury, and him too. From the morning, when he went into the bathroom, I could hear him, and just for the sounds he made in there, I could tell he appreciated this luxury. And afterwards he would go and shine his shoes and then have his breakfast, and then he'd leave for work, which was nearby, and he didn't have a car yet. He bought the first car after I already had my second daughter, and that was a luxury too. He bought it second-hand and on credit. It was a two-tone Taunus. On Sundays, and even on Saturdays, when it was nice, instead of taking the tram to go to the park, the four of us went in the car and followed the tram race so we wouldn't get lost, and we walked along proudly with my second daughter in a carriage, splendid and serene, and my first daughter running this way and that beside us, still so skinny, and no matter what you did, she'd get dirty immediately. Those were good times. There are still pictures of the four of us in the park together, black and white pictures. There are this kind of picture of us at the seashore too, and he had already begun losing his hair and putting on weight. I told him, it's not good for you to gain weight like this. But he would smile and say, that way you can see we went for nothing. And in the end, it was true. We did went for nothing, even though he thought we never had enough. And we live in a bad neighborhood, that I didn't have a mink coat, and we couldn't go to a hotel on vacation where I didn't have to worry about anything, but instead rented an apartment with people we knew, and I still had to cook and clean, while he would have liked us to have our own apartment and not rent, but I thought we had everything we needed. At the seashore, we joined a close family and all our friends, and we sat together on the beach, and there were always more women than there were men. There were my aunts and my husband's sisters and the children and my grandmother, and when everyone was there together, it warmed me to the bone. This year is the first year that I have been to the seashore since he's been gone, and everything has changed. Even our friends seem to be more with each other than with me, except for the other women who've lost husband, and there are beginning to be a lot of us. I can't say that of all my friends, and my daughter tells me I'm imagining it, but it does seem like they are saying to one another, well, there she is, poor thing. She's not the same since she lost her husband. and they come over to say hello, and then they walk away together. My daughter from Ménilmontant, who came to join me, told me I was imagining things, but she said it without conviction. And I know her, and I can tell when she has a conviction. But I still reserve a room at the seaside again this year. Maybe this year they'll have changed, and me too. I've gained weight and bought myself some new skirts, and in Brussels I go out and see my girlfriends and some couples too. And we are friendly and hug each other. And at Easter I'll go see my sister in Israel. She's also just lost her husband, and it was a blessing too, because he was unconscious for a long time. And my daughters are pushing me to travel and not stay home in the winter when it's gloomy, but instead to go where it's warm, since I have a sister in a sunny country, and I love the heat so much. And if my husband had liked it too, and if he hadn't had such a fair skin and been so delicate, we might very well have moved down there near my sister. I felt so good down there when we went the first time. It's true. I felt there like I've never felt anywhere else in the world. But he couldn't imagine himself there. Not completely. I felt it and didn't say anything to him. And when we came home to Brussels, I said, as I always did, that it was good to be home. And I could see that he agreed. My sister is younger than I am, but she's much taller than me. She has lots of humor, and every day she does gymnastics in front of the television, and she has humor. Still, she blames life, and she still suffers today because we lost our parents in the camps. She gets angry talking about it, and she's also angry at God. Me, I don't talk about it. Where does it get you? And neither did my husband talk about those things. And when he talked about his memories, the girls and I would be riveted. And he would put the sad things aside. And everyone liked him so much, and he never leaned on anyone. Even when we had terrible money problems, he never borrowed. But except for when she's angry, my sister has an enormous sense of humor. And she makes wonderful cakes. And when she came to see us in Brussels, and my husband came home, we brought the cake out of the oven, and he tasted it and really appreciated it. And when she was there, we squeezed in even more. She slept with my daughter. And my father-in-law, my husband's father, also lived with us, but he was always sick, and he had no sense of humor, and he slept in the living room, and the living room always smelled like medicine. And he died when he was 68. And my husband, when he was 68, remembered that his father died at that age. And he said, my father was already dead at this age. And I would say to him, but that's another generation. They died younger. And he was a man who was always in bad health. And you are never sick. And you certainly don't look your age. And I didn't either at the time look my age. And I was 9 years younger than him, and everyone said, you look so young. And no one said, your face looks washed out. And even when I had the flu, I managed to hide it with makeup. At the time, my 2 daughters had already left the house. Both of them were far away. The younger one even further than the other one, who hadn't gone to Ménilmontant yet, but to Montparnasse. I had a black dog, and we had moved to a nice neighborhood very close to all of our friends, and I liked my apartment a great deal, and he did too. And there was a lot of room, and everyone could come from far away where everyone was living, because we had 2 guest rooms, and we didn't need to squeeze in anymore. And we had a big bathroom and another small bathroom. And we never could have imagined in the beginning that we have 2 bathrooms and 2 guest rooms and a garage and a huge basement and a car, a new Audi, which we didn't have to pay for on time. And my husband would go to auction to buy paintings, and either I went with him, but I always worried about spending too much money, and if anything ever happened, we wouldn't have enough. But for him, it was a pleasure to buy. So I didn't say anything, so as not to spoil his pleasure. But it was a little spoil anyway, because even if I didn't say anything, he could sense my fear and even my reticence. So he'd say, "Come on, let's go." Then I blamed myself. So the next time he said, "Let's go to an auction to see if there are any nice paintings," I would say, "I had something to do." And he would go alone. And he would bring back a painting. And he always thought he had found a bargain. And when of our daughters came, he would take on that air of his, a special little air full of humor. And he'd say, "Haven't you noticed something different in the house?" And right away, one or the other would say, "There is a new painting." And he'd get up and start turning on all the lights so she could see it better and give her opinion of it. And she, one or the other or both of them, they would look at it carefully and they would say, "What a beautiful painting this time, you have really gotten a bargain. And it's very beautiful, and the frame too, and it changes the whole apartment." And then he'd get his little air about him again and say, "Guess how much I paid for it?" And he finished by telling how much. And everyone agreed that he'd got a bargain. I knew that my daughters, it wasn't really what they liked in paintings, and I think they may have even thought them rather awful. But they couldn't quite bring themselves to say that they were awful paintings, not even to me. And for him, it had become his passion. And more, he sought out auction houses, and now they were sending him catalogs with reproduction of the paintings that were for sale, and he would release them in advance. And I would tremble because I knew that we had almost nothing saved, and he was going to work all week again and make almost no money. And he was even beginning to lose some, and he was trying to sell the business, but he couldn't find a buyer because it was a recession. And all of our friends had sold out at the right time, but he could never quite decide because he needed to get in his car in the morning and go off to work. And to really retire once and for all, he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And he thought that if he stopped working, he'd just die. And that's pretty much what did happen. But I still couldn't stop him from buying those paintings, no, I couldn't. But I wonder if they really were the bargains that he said they were when he saw that I was worried about the expense. And he said, "We can always resell them and make a profit." And I would say, "Do you just think we'll make a profit, or will we definitively make a profit?" It depended on the day and on my fear. And my daughters told me, "Don't be afraid, what can happen?" Later, when he got sick, he couldn't go to the auction anymore. And that's what happened. And I wanted the best for him, that he should get the best care. And that's what happened. And of course, I had been right to be afraid. But my daughters and him too, when he was well, they always said, "You worry too much. If it was up to you, we never would have bought this apartment or had the business or the shop." And it's a good thing we did, because we always managed and did relatively well. It's true, we did do well, relatively speaking, except that something did happen, and it was exactly what I was afraid of, and it was the worst thing that could have happened. My daughters always told me, "Don't worry so much, we'll get through it." But when it happened, we didn't get through it. On the contrary, it sang us. And when he got sick, we thought we'd get through it. For a few months, he got better, and we even went to the seashore. He got tired quicker than before, but we took walks on the pier and met friends, and everyone was happy to see us and told him how good he looked. And then we just sank. He got sick again, and his mouth drooped again, and he drank his food, and you had to cut his meat, and we just sank and sank right up to the end. And we didn't make it through that, and he couldn't even make jokes anymore, so I tried. but I never was good at making jokes. It was him and my sister who were good at that. I was certainly good at some things, but I have to say that towards the end, I wasn't good for anything. And I nearly broke my back lifting him up. And my daughters, both of them came and they say, "You can't manage it anymore. He needs 24-hour care, and you can't manage it." And we put him someplace, and we brought things from home so he would feel at home. An armchair, and a lamp, and a rug, and we put him there somewhere. But I couldn't stand it, so I brought him home again. But that was impossible, and my daughter from Ménilmontant knew it, she who had organized the whole business of getting him into a place. And I agreed, and anyway, I couldn't take care of him anymore. She came, and she yelled at me. She said, "I think that's it. You want to die too." Yes, that's what she told me, and other things besides, which I don't want to repeat, because it has to do with things I never speak of. But my daughter spoke about them, and I had a shock. And it must have been a big shock, because I was really drifting, and I was ready to be put away myself. I had already put myself away in any case, and without really realizing that I was drifting. And when she yelled at me, I was shocked, but I didn't cry. It was a good shock. And we took him back, where he was getting good care, and he had the rug and the armchair and the lamp from the house, and we went to see him every day, and he didn't even try to ask why he was there. Me, I needed to make excuses and explain that it was for his good, so that he could come home quicker. But I don't think he was listening. And all of his sisters, those who were still alive, came, and he didn't even act surprised, neither by them nor by the fact that their husbands were there too, and his daughters and his grandchildren. I don't cry very often, but now I feel like crying. He was always in bed, and the armchair was useless to him, and his poor body was in pain, and the nurse came all the time to move him so he'd have less pain. And I told him, "I love you, Jack." And his daughters told him all kinds of things and stroked his handsome face. And one of his daughters sang him songs in her language, and that seemed to make him happy. And one day, he was even able to go sit in his armchair, and he felt better, and the doctor said he has an incredible heart. The doctor didn't understand how his heart could go on beating, and most of the time, everyone was quiet around him so he could sleep. It's always good to sleep. It gives you strength, and he could hardly swallow anything because I think a part of his throat was paralyzed, like his mouth, so they fed him some other way, and his heart held, but everything hurt. His whole body hurt, and he groaned without realizing he was groaning. As soon as he started groaning, I couldn't stand it anymore, and you felt like there was nothing you could do for him except sing to him, and on top of it, songs in our language. And it's funny, one day he looked better, and the nurse, a very nice guy, who always came to move him, said, "Look how good he looks today." And we really felt that the nurse loved him, and that he loved the nurse. He always liked new people. The nurse had a kind of native strength. He could pick him like a feather to move him around, while I broke my ribs picking him up. And the doctor said, "With broken ribs, there is nothing to do but wait and let them heal." The doctor came every day to see him too, and every day he talked about his heart, and I couldn't stand it because he never gave us any hope. In the end, I liked the nurse better. He gave me hope. He told me that he looked better, and later they told me that's always a bad sign, because right before dying, people often look like they are getting better, and then they die. But I didn't know that at the time, and fortunately, no one thought to tell me. Not the sisters, not my daughters, not the sister's husband, not the friends. At night, we left, and everyone came to sleep at the house, and the husband of the sister from America couldn't get to sleep because of the jet lag. So he talked all night to my oldest daughter, and I think that it did them good. And it did me good to feel like the house was alive. And they talked about before when he was young, and the three sisters, when all three of them were alive, and about my husband's father, and about his mother. In the morning, as soon as we got up, someone would call over there to talk to the nurse. We couldn't admit to each other exactly why we called, but everyone knew, and each one, when he or she came out of a bedroom or one of the bathrooms, each one asked, "Have you called yet?" "Yes." "And everything's fine." "Good." And we look at each other, and it's not that we were hungry, but we ate something anyway. At the very least, we drank coffee. And I had to make coffee 2 or 3 times every morning because there were so many of us, and still others came who had slept somewhere else and wanted coffee, and also asked if I had called, and what did the nurse say. And if they didn't come over, they telephoned. And when the phone rang, I never knew if it was the others calling to say they were coming or not, or whether it was over there calling. So, at every ring, everyone jumped, and the days went by, and my older daughter had to go back in Paris to finish her job, and she said she'd come back in 2 days, and she also told her father, and I don't know if he understood, and that was what he was waiting for, or if he wasn't happy that she left. At any rate, that morning I didn't have to call, because they called me first from over there. And it was better that way. And we didn't have coffee, and we called Paris, and it was better that way. And in Paris it was sunny and hot, and not in Brussels. And how cold it was, but not too cold. And she was coming, and too bad about the work. She'd do it later, and it would be all right. And it was all right in Brussels too. And everything was all right. And a friend would drive her, and he'd be careful. And no, it wouldn't be better to take the train, although in general it was better. It was a good train, Paris-Brussels, especially in first class. But this time, no, not even in first class. And that this friend had a nice car with soft seats, and that was already something, all that softness. And his voice was soft too. And maybe the voice of the people on the train wouldn't be like that. And she didn't feel like having people sitting across from her. And on the train, it wasn't always easy to avoid that. But in the car, you always could, and there was just the sky in front of you. And the sky was big and restful, with this band of clouds and no noise in the car. And then nightfall, and the friend who understood what had happened because it had happened to him too, and there was nothing to explain, and just the softness of the seats and the gentleness of his driving and going forward into the night. And there was no need to go on about it, and he didn't say it's better this way or ask how old, because they always ask you how old, as if that explained everything. And we didn't talk about him, but not on purpose. We smoked a lot, we stopped to buy a coffee or some Belgian chocolate, and we remarked once again how good Belgian chocolate is. And it was both a very long and a very short ride by the time we arrived in Brussels. And in general, the Paris-Brussels or Brussels-Paris trip is always too long, but not this time. It could have lasted hours longer, and in the night, the soft seats and the voice became softer and softer, and then the voice was almost completely quiet. It was the silence that became soft, and we were both in our thoughts, and no one asked, "What are you thinking about?" And we felt intimate. Afterwards, we never felt quite as intimate again, but at that moment, we were very intimate, and there was nothing else to say. And it was winter, but in the car we didn't feel the cold, we just saw it. At a given moment, I could have easily put my head on my friend's shoulder and close my eyes, but in our intimacy, this was not even necessary. Finally, we arrived, and I rang to let them know I was there, but I had the keys and I opened up. And I asked my friend if he wanted to come up for a minute to say hello, and he did. And my mother was very glad to hug my friend, whom she always liked, and my aunt, who is dead now, even said about him on a radio broadcast that he was a handsome boy, and what a wonderful man. And there, at the house, everyone was there, and there wasn't any more intimacy, nor calm, but a funny kind of buzz in the air. And my mother hadn't even put on any lipstick, and the mirrors were covered with napkins, and my mother held me gently in her arms, and we sang, and it wasn't like 2 days earlier. And my friend left, and everyone thought it was very nice that he'd driven me to Brussels. And it was a shame that he wasn't staying to eat, because they were already getting busy in the kitchen, because it was evening and we had to eat. And my mother didn't look good, and no one told her that her face looked washed out, and her eyes were all small and brown like the eyes of a very young child, or a very old woman. And my sister's children were there, and we kissed them a lot, and they let us, and had a serious little air about them, and if we weren't kissing them, we were patting them on the head, and my mother said that when she saw him in his bed, he was handsome, and without one wrinkle, and that his mouth didn't droop anymore, and that he was as handsome as before, and it was as if he wasn't sick anymore, and was very well. So then I wanted to go see him, and my mother said, "Eat first," and I said, "All right," and I ate, but didn't taste anything. I don't remember what it was, but probably some bread and butter. And then I went with my uncle, who had come a long way, and my sister, and my brother-in-law. And he wasn't in his room anymore, but in a room down below, in the dark, in the morgue. And he was wrapped in a sheet, so I didn't know what to do. But I did know. I went over, and I drew open the sheet, and I saw him, and it was true what my mother had said. And I stroked his face, and I hugged him, and I think my sister did too. We came home in the dark, my sister and I, arm in arm, I think. I don't remember anymore, but it certainly must have been like that. Anyway, we didn't say anything, and when we got back to the house, no one asked any question, and no one spoke, and it was night time, and the children had to go to bed, and the rabbi came, and I got very nervous, and everyone felt it. And my mother asked me to calm down, and I made an effort, but it didn't do any good. No, it didn't at all. Still, I tried. I really tried, but it didn't do any good. But finally, we had to go to bed, but no one could, and so everyone stayed up, and from time to time someone said something, and even the tram had stopped running, and no more cars went by on the avenue, and the uncle from America finally fell asleep in my father's armchair, and everyone said that's where he always slept. So in the end, everyone went to bed. Even when you are sleeping, you can tell if a house is full or empty. And the house stayed full for a while, and every night for a week there was a big crowd. This whole crowd ate, talked, and drank. Me and my 2 daughters sat side by side and waited. And finally the big crowd left, and the house felt full, but only with the close family that had come from all over. And at night you could feel the family. And then my daughter had to leave to work. I had a bad feeling when she left again, but I didn't say anything to her. I could see that her blue eyes were nearly white, and that it wasn't a good time to leave and go to work. But even that night in the house, she worked in the dining room on a portable computer, and I could feel her while I slept, And it worried me because I know that my oldest daughter needs a lot of sleep, otherwise she has too many thoughts and there is nothing to stop her having them. And sometimes when I woke up at night to go to the toilet, I could see her face bent toward the glow of her computer and her blue eyes nearly wide. One night I went over to her. She didn't look up, and finally I put my hand on her shoulder. She raised her face up to me and she said, "It's so quiet tonight." Yes, it was quiet. I didn't feel like going back to bed, so I sat down at the table across from her and watched her work. After a while, she said very softly, "It's almost morning. I feel like having breakfast." And together we went into the kitchen and we had breakfast, the two of us together. And we looked out the kitchen window at the garden below. The garden was all frozen, and it had been so long since I had had breakfast, just the two of us, that I ate a whole roll with butter, and I felt that it was going down. And then my daughter said, "It's true, he looked handsome," and his mouth didn't droop, and his face was relaxed. And then she said, "What are we going to do now?" It wasn't a question, and there was nothing to answer. After a while, she said, "I'm going to take a bath because soon the day is going to start, and everyone will get up, and even with the 2 bathrooms, it's not enough." And I told her she was right, and I got out a clean towel because I didn't know where we were with the towels, so I started a wash in the washing machine. And then I heard my sister-in-law get up. I knew it was her because she takes these little tiny steps, and she's the only one in the family who does that. So I made some more coffee, and my oldest daughter came out of the bathroom, and she said she'd go buy some rolls and cigarettes and the paper, and did anyone need anything while she was out. And we thought, but no one did need anything, or if they did, they couldn't think of it. We didn't tell my old aunt, who is in the old people's home, what happened to my husband. And to this day, she doesn't know. And when her sister died, we didn't tell her either, so sometimes she complains that her sister doesn't come to see her anymore, and she blames life. Her daughter writes her at least once a week, but she never writes anything about the granddaughter, because what there is to say, you just don't tell a grandmother who blames life. In any case, she thinks her sister is still alive, and my husband too. But I wonder sometimes if she still remembers him, because there are so many things she doesn't remember anymore. She even thinks that my mother, her sister, is still alive, when she died in 1942, and often she asks about her. And for some reason, she thinks that she's in America, whereas she never set a foot in America. And if she had been there, she certainly would not have died in 1942. We had a lot of plans, my mother and I, but we were never able to do them. I didn't used to think about that very much, but now I think about it more, and I'm not as fatalistic as I once was, but I do get angry about it sometimes. And when my daughter says that we should try to find out about my mother and her paintings, I get angry, because I know very well that we will never find them, and there is no point in bringing it up. I get angry, and I can't help wondering what life would have been like if none of that had ever happened. My mother was tall and had beautiful legs. She was always very elegant, and my youngest daughter is like her, and I'm glad for that. It makes me happy. She often changes clothes twice a day, and so does her husband. Her daughter is that way too, and even her son. My husband was always a good dresser and well-groomed, and his cheeks were lovely to kiss. When I think of him, I always think about his cheeks. I also think about the rest of it, and I always think about how each time we went away on vacation, something happened to him. Once, A boat or hit him in the face and knocked him out. Every time we came home from vacation, everyone asked my husband what happened to him this time, and he always had a story to tell about his mishaps and made everyone laugh. Yet, I always tried to watch out for him so nothing would happen, but something always happened anyway. I always made him wear a hat so he wouldn't get sunstroke and sunscreen on his shoulders and on his nose because he had very fair skin, but something always happened to him just the same. And my oldest daughter too. When she was little, something always happened to her on vacation. Either she got lost and friends found her miles away, or else she would fall and break her nose because she was a roughneck. Once she was digging a hole on the beach and cut her cousin's foot with a shovel, and her cousin bled and we had to take her to the emergency room. They gave me a lot of worry, the two of them, but they were small things really, little incidents that made you laugh afterwards. My youngest daughter also gave me a lot of joy, but with fewer worries. She never broke her nose, thank God. Even though we still laugh about all that, and it does us good. There are a lot of things we laugh about now, about the dog that I bought, and also the dog that my oldest daughter and her friend have. Sometimes she comes to see me with her dog, a big dirty old mutt, and it's weird that my daughter should have a dog. I never would have thought that that girl would get a dog, but she has one, and she loves it, and takes it out 3 times a day. And every time I see this dog, I say to myself, never again. And yet, when I had a dog, I loved it terribly, to the point where I spoiled it, and I couldn't leave that dog alone for a minute. And when I did go out, he made an incredible racket, as if he were a big dog, even though he was just a miniature poodle that I would carry against my Astrakhan coat when I took the bus, and you couldn't tell the dog from the coat. I love that dog, and if I don't want one now, it's because owning a dog is slavery, and now that my husband is dead, I want to be able to go visit the family I have left, and with a dog, I wouldn't be able to. I know that you can put a dog in a cage and check it like luggage, but it's not like traveling with just a suitcase, and I'm always so nervous before a trip. I know it would even be worse with a dog. And now, I want life to be easy. And if I feel like going out, I just want to go and not worry about it. No, sometimes I go to a noon concert with a girlfriend who's also a widow, and they don't let dogs in the concert hall. Before my marriage, I also used to go to concerts, and I don't know why we almost never went after we were married. And yet, my sister-in-law played the piano, so my husband came from a musical family, but he had never learned to play because he was working by the time he was 14, and that's the way it was. But my sisters-in-law both knew how to play, and my daughter from Ménilmontant had wanted to get a piano for her niece, my youngest daughter's daughter, but she never did. And there are a lot of things we say we are going to do, but we never get around to. And in general, we are sorry afterwards. And I'm sure that my daughter is sorry about the piano, because she always talks about how she wanted to learn, and she always tells a story about how when she asked her father if she could learn to play the piano, he threw the piano out because he'd already heard enough of his sister playing, and it was always for Elise, and he was sick of it. But I don't remember this story, and I think she made it up, like the story she made up about being afraid to visit my husband's parents when my mother-in-law was still alive, because her hair hung down and she yelled a lot and made her drink chicken soup all the time. One day, she told this story in an interview, and my husband's youngest sister was terribly wounded because she adored her mother. She tells a lot of stories, and not all true, but there are some that are true, and usually these are sad stories, not funny ones. She tells the funny ones when we are all together and they come to her, and they are not always true either, but sometimes they are.